Meghan Markle, she may have stepped down from royal duties more than 5 years ago, but she keeps taking aim at the monarchy. The Duchess of Sussex has made reportedly at least half a dozen swipes at the royal family this year, and it's only June.
It began not with a lawsuit or a front-page exposé, but with a single line dropped into the void of a primetime broadcast, surgical in tone, seismic in impact. On stage at the BET Awards, Tyler Perry, a man not prone to theatrics when it comes to personal alliances, paused between tribute lines and glanced briefly away from the teleprompter. Then he said it, "You can't build a palace on unpaid bills." It wasn't a shout, a rant, or even a provocation. It was quiet, delivered with the cool restraint of someone who had rehearsed a different version of that moment 100 times in his head. But this time, he didn't stick to the script. The words landed like a hidden clause in a contract no one expected to be invoked. At first, the room didn't quite know how to react. There was no immediate gasp, no awkward laughter to bridge the discomfort. It was the kind of silence that only happens when the subtext is too loud to ignore.
As ever, her new company, the very first thing she said was, look, when I had the TIG, which was her previous lifestyle website, I loved cooking and I loved gardening and being a hostess, and she basically said I had to keep my light under a bushel at this time because of the royal family. Then we get her Netflix show.
The Peacock Theater in Los Angeles, usually buzzing with choreographed applause and star-forged smiles, felt momentarily unlit, as if the lighting crew had dimmed the house on cue. In the second row, a music executive raised an eyebrow. Backstage, a stylist reportedly whispered, "Did he just say that?" Within minutes, the line had gone viral. On X, formerly Twitter, the quote was clipped and captioned with side-eye emojis. On Instagram, celebrity gossip pages reposted it with red siren graphics and cryptic commentary. We all know who he meant. The message, however veiled, was unmistakable. The target, Meghan Markle. Within the entertainment community, where coded language is fluently spoken and rarely forgotten, Perry's line wasn't just a jab. It was an act of detachment, a boundary drawn.
Her creativity being stunted. She says that when, she first, as a result of the royal family, she says that when she became a mum, she would have thought that she'd be able to have a baby on her hip and give speeches, but then, the whole drama and the pain and everything that was caused by being part of the royal family.
For an industry that trades in symbols, it was the equivalent of a silent door closing. And it meant something specific coming from him. This wasn't a rival or former collaborator lashing out. This was a man who, until that moment, had been one of Meghan and Harry's most visible champions. When the Sussexes landed in California after their now infamous departure from royal life, it was Perry who offered them sanctuary, literally. He had sent a private jet, provided them his $18 million Beverly Hills estate, and reportedly covered their security, no questions asked. In a world where even the illusion of generosity is carefully brokered, Perry's support had seemed unusually sincere, which made this moment all the more charged. For Tyler Perry to say those words, on that stage on that night, was not spontaneous. It was strategic. A pointed disassociation delivered in the language of a parable. Industry insiders knew it immediately. It was less a quote than a verdict, said a longtime Hollywood publicist who was in the room. You don't go rogue like that unless you want it to stick. And boy, did it stick. Because in a town where public silence is often a protective gesture, breaking it means something's broken.
And because Princess Anne has declined parties and personal fanfare for her 75th birthday, and she's instead hosted more than 100 of her charities at Buckingham Palace. So she reportedly spent more than 2 hours at this event and personally greeting more than 200 guests and thanking them for their work. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
In a town where loyalty is its own currency, Perry had once offered more than just friendship. He had given the Sussexes shelter, a private jet, and the most precious commodity of all, discretion. At a time when their departure from royal life was setting global headlines ablaze, Tyler Perry was the one person who didn't flinch, who extended help not in exchange for a photo op or production rights, but because, as he would later put it, they needed safety and I had the means. But in Hollywood, where favors are rarely free even when wrapped in sincerity, the true cost often reveals itself much later. That quiet period in 2020 when the couple exited royal life and arrived in California without security, property, or a concrete plan, was shrouded in mystery. British tabloids speculated about their whereabouts. American media trailed decoys. The public knew they had landed somewhere in Los Angeles, but not where, and certainly not under whose roof. It wasn't until their 2021 sit-down with Oprah that Meghan publicly named Tyler Perry as their behind-the-scenes benefactor. The revelation was offered as a gesture of gratitude, but for those familiar with Perry's notoriously guarded private life, it marked a turning point. "He doesn't like to be used as a plot point," said one associate who has worked with Perry for over a decade. That interview made him part of their narrative, and I don't think he ever intended to be. What few knew then was that it was Perry's sprawling estate in Beverly Ridge, one of Los Angeles' most exclusive gated communities, that provided the landing pad.
And two totally different representations of what it is to be royal. That's right. She's spent her 75th birthdays in August, but obviously that's the time of the year, midsummer for the Brits, when they're not around. So she doesn't want a party, any fanfare, anything like that. She's had these 200 guests, all from 100 different charities.
Armed guards were stationed discreetly at the perimeter. A rotating security team, reportedly costing upwards of $150,000 a month, ensured privacy from paparazzi drones and zoom lenses. For several months, Meghan and Harry lived in near-total seclusion, using Perry's infrastructure as a transitional cocoon while they negotiated multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify and fielded global media attention. But what even fewer knew, what wasn't captured in any interview or press release, was that behind Perry's generosity were years of quiet tension, mounting financial confusion, and what one insider now refers to as an unspoken imbalance that turned into a public debt. According to this source, Perry's team began quietly raising red flags as early as mid-2021. There were questions, the insider said, about when the Sussexes planned to formalize repayment for the costs Perry had fronted. Security bills, staff overtime, operational logistics. None of that came cheap. And yet, to Perry's inner circle, no structured reimbursement ever arrived. The imbalance wasn't just financial, it was reputational. Perry had lent not only his resources, but his credibility. And as Meghan and Harry's brand grew more controversial, the proximity began to cost him.
She's a working royal member of the royal family and has been for years. And it's not just some of these charities. If you look back, she's been with Save the Children, for instance, since 1970. She's been engaged with a charity which works with horses and disabled children since 1971. Wow. I mean, these are back when she herself was in her 20s.
He was catching heat in boardrooms and media meetings, said a former executive at BET who helped coordinate Perry's 2021 programming slate. It wasn't always overt, but there were comments, questions. Is Tyler going to get dragged into this? Over time, the dynamic shifted from patronage to pressure. Invitations slowed. Conversations cooled. And while Perry never publicly distanced himself, those in his orbit say his patience was wearing thin. Tyler values loyalty, but he values boundaries more, said someone close to his production team. And at a certain point, the silence started to feel like complicity. By the time Perry stepped on stage at the BET Awards, his message wasn't just about unpaid bills. It was about balance and the breach of it. 3 days after the BET broadcast, the silence became deafening. In the corridors of Harpo Productions, where Meghan Markle's name had once reverberated with urgency and gravitas, the shift was almost spectral. Sources close to the media company confirmed what industry watchers had already begun to whisper. Oprah Winfrey, the media titan who had once staked her journalistic reputation on the Duchess of Sussex, had gone completely quiet.
Her patronages, meetings and duties they spent a day. And this journalist just said she just knew everything about this charity. She knew all the people involved, the work that they were doing. So lending her name to it, of course, draws attention to it, allows for better fundraising. This is, of course, what the royal family, the whole ethos of the royal family for generations.
No calls, no statements, no soft-touch Instagram reposts, just absence. There haven't been any mentions. No contact. Nothing, said one person familiar with Harpo's internal discussions. It's like the air got sucked out of the room. The source, a longtime producer within Oprah's orbit, described a distinct tonal shift inside the company. It's not just that Meghan's not being talked about, it's that she's being deliberately not talked about. And in this business, silence is rarely accidental. This wasn't just personal, it was institutional. A calculated retreat. In media, silence doesn't merely erase a subject from coverage, it demagnetizes them, strips them of relevance, recategorizes them as reputational risk. And in Harpo's case, a brand so scrupulously managed it has outlasted entire network regimes. The Meghan file, once an A priority, had reportedly been downgraded to what one assistant called PR quarantine. Any proposed mention, on air or online, now had to clear multiple layers of internal review. The same week, whispers from the PR world began solidifying into formal protocol. In a separate conversation, a senior executive at a major firm representing multiple A-list clients confirmed the emergence of a new internal code, Markle Risk. The phrase, typically used in back-channel discussions, is shorthand for talent that carries extreme media volatility, meaning unpredictable press cycles, rapid public sentiment shifts, and potentially explosive fallout. It's the kind of classification previously reserved for clients in legal turmoil or with unresolved scandals.
There's so many people parking there to visit the house. It just shows how popular the king is.
That's right. This is Highgrave, which is the house that he lives in with Camilla. This is a private house, and it's only the gardens that are open, but it's open for these summer months. Can you imagine, though? You've paid effectively 1,200 Australian dollars to park your car there.
She's officially on that list, the executive said flatly. It means don't pitch her, don't book her, don't associate unless you're ready for collateral. In internal agency memos, the warning signs are stark. One risk assessment document, dated April 2024, highlighted Meghan's ongoing media unpredictability, unresolved financial scrutiny surrounding the Archewell Foundation, and multiple high-profile disassociations from former allies and institutional partners. Another flagged narrative fatigue as a key deterrent. Audiences, it seems, were no longer sympathetic, but suspicious. The very tools that once propelled her to the front lines of cultural conversation, mystique, rebellion, glamour, had become liabilities. The persona is unmoored from the product, the PR executive explained. She sells authenticity but delivers ambiguity. That's a nightmare for reputation managers. Even the most powerful allies, it seemed, had recalibrated. Gayle King, Oprah's closest confidant and media lieutenant, has not referenced Meghan publicly in over a year. Behind the scenes, sources say King, too, has adopted a posture of strategic neutrality. She's stepping back without saying she's stepping back, noted a morning show producer at CBS. It's choreography. It's how you manage exits in this town. As the Markle narrative began to rot from the inside, unfulfilled media deals, erratic public appearances, mounting financial questions, Oprah's team, known for its ruthlessly forward-looking strategy, did what Hollywood often does when a once golden figure begins to tarnish.
Those bus loads, those visitors, they can just pull in there, they can whack into anyone's car. There's people who live in these houses that, have disabilities that can't get to their car to get to hospital appointments.
Oh my goodness.
So, but you can imagine, somebody said to the king, do you think we might be able to, have more parking at Highgrave? If that were the case.
They turned the page. Quietly. Completely. What had once been a gilded image, the defiant duchess escaping monarchy for autonomy, had begun to dissolve into something unrecognizable. Meghan Markle had once stood, arms folded and chin high, as a symbol of self-liberation from a centuries-old institution, drawing the gaze of millions who saw her as a lightning rod for cultural change. She was positioned at the intersection of modern feminism, racial identity, and royal reinvention, a living disruption of the crown's ironclad pageantry. But now, that symbolism was curdling. The palace walls, once cast as her gilded cage, had become a kind of ghostly shield she no longer had. Outside the monarchy's domain, where rules were rigid but understood, Meghan had entered a more treacherous realm, the unforgiving marketplace of celebrity credibility. And here, her currency was quickly losing value. Invitations to galas and media summits quietly stopped arriving. Red carpets she once graced now unfurled for fresher names with fewer complications. Editorial calendars that once orbited around her narrative had moved on. Even in philanthropic circles, where optimism and image often override scrutiny, Her name was now met with what one nonprofit director described as a pause and a pivot. As the glamour peeled away, what emerged was not the carefully managed global advocate for women and girls image, but a tangle of financial ambiguity, unkept deliverables, and corporate skepticism. The public's attention began to slide toward the numbers. Not the net worth headlines that had once punctuated her post-royal rise, but the hard figures buried in tax filings, foundation disclosures, and the absence of output from a sprawling media empire that had been pitched with such dazzling ambition. Most pointedly, scrutiny began to swirl around Archewell, the charitable foundation she co-founded with Prince Harry and once described, with cinematic flourish, as a global engine for compassion. When it launched, Archewell was introduced not just as a nonprofit, but as a movement. The name itself was meant to evoke forward motion, healing, legacy. Glossy mission statements promised projects in mental health, digital civility, women's empowerment, and storytelling. But years in, insiders and analysts began asking the same uncomfortable question: where was the actual work? The foundation's latest tax filings offered little clarity and even less comfort.
No way! They don't want the pub.
2 state visits, and this is apparently causing a few headaches because of the president's expectations. So there are negotiations happening right behind the scenes because of what Trump wants. What's going on here?
It's hard to believe that President Trump has expectations, doesn't it? Look, he's, as you say, coming over in September.
Nearly $3 million in administrative costs were logged in a year that yielded no major programming announcements and only a sparse public footprint. That's not a global engine, said a nonprofit governance advisor who reviewed the filings. That's a sputtering vehicle that's barely left the driveway. Legal experts began whispering more pointed terms: self-dealing, private benefit, fiscal mismanagement, and asking whether the expenses detailed in the documents, including high-end travel, personal stylists, and brand consultants with vague titles, qualified as legitimate nonprofit expenditures under IRS scrutiny. You can't run a charitable foundation like a personal brand amplifier, said a former tax compliance officer for a California nonprofit watchdog group. Eventually, someone notices. And usually it's the IRS. But the financial questions were only the beginning. The foundation's media offshoot, Archewell Productions, which had inked an eye-popping deal with Netflix reportedly worth over $100 million, had failed to produce content of substance or scale. Projects like Pearl, an animated series centered on a female protagonist inspired by influential women in history, were canceled before release. Their docuseries, Harry and Meghan, performed modestly but failed to deliver the prestige narrative the couple had promised. Internal memos from Netflix, according to someone familiar with development meetings, expressed concern that the content lacked editorial edge and cultural gravity. As the sheen wore thin, the public, and perhaps more critically, the industry, began to reassess. Was this woman, who once captivated Oprah, energized activist movements, and redefined the optics of royalty, now simply a media entrepreneur with more vision than execution? Was Archewell a vehicle for philanthropy or for branding? And if the latter, how long could it be sustained under the lens of public accountability? For the first time since stepping onto the world stage, Meghan's image was no longer hers to sculpt. The questions, once confined to tabloids, were now leaking into corporate boardrooms, donor meetings, legal roundtables, and high-level talent agency strategy calls. She had stepped outside the monarchy to find freedom, but in doing so, she had also stepped outside its protective silence. And in this new world, every invoice, every contract, every omission had a voice,